Well, this week's Ask Energy question is about one of my favorite topics, and that is metabolic efficiency training. Yes. By the way, there is a link to this down below. If you have not purchased my newest edition, my third edition, you can find it on Amazon or the Energy Performance website. Anyway, back to the question. The question really, and actually, I get this question quite a bit. The question is, what is going to happen to me when I start following metabolic efficiency training? Now, there are two parts of metabolic efficiency training. One is nutrition, one is exercise. I'm only going to talk about the nutrition part of it because literally nutrition makes up about 3/4, if not more, of the equation of improving your body's metabolic efficiency. So I'm not going to talk about the exercise side of that because that's so variable depending on if you're training for something, what type of athlete you are. So let's just focus on the nutrition side of it. When you first change any type of your nutrition, yes, your body will go through changes. But let me be specific to metabolic efficiency training. A lot of it, I'm going to use one of my favorite sayings, it depends. Okay. Love saying that because here's the thing, we are all N of one. We all have different biology. We all have different genetics. But what I will tell you is your body's response to following more of a metabolic efficiency training plan will largely depend on your daily consumption of carbohydrates. So, as an example, if you are someone who follows a super high carb nutrition plan, kind of low protein, low fat, you're going to have a very different response than someone who is coming from a maybe following a more moderate carbohydrate, moderate protein, moderate fat nutrition plan. Okay. So the first thing you need to think about is how many carbohydrates, and not quantitatively, but how many carbohydrates am I eating per day? If it's high, I'm gonna tell you exactly what you'll start feeling when you switch to a metabolic efficiency plan versus a moderate. Okay. So you kind of have to classify yourself in terms of, am I a high or moderate carbohydrate guy or gal? That will dictate how you will feel when you start implementing metabolic efficiency. Now, let me go back just in case you've never heard of metabolic efficiency training before. There's a host of resources. I'll just point you to the Energy Performance website. Click on ME training, metabolic efficiency training. Click on that tab on the top of the toolbar, and you can read all about it. Now, that said, remember, the whole point of metabolic efficiency training is to optimize blood sugar for many different reasons, to have positive health outcomes, positive longevity outcomes, positive cognitive functioning outcomes, and yes, to teach your body to use more of its fat stores as energy, which there is a huge athletic performance benefit to that also. Okay, back to the question at hand. What is going to happen to me when I start following a metabolic efficiency nutrition plan? Well, remember, if you are, I'm going to separate into two. If you are a high carb person, like really high carb person, right? And how do you know if you're following a lot of carbs if you're not quantitatively measuring that or keeping track of it via a software or app? Well, you probably have to eat about every 90 minutes to 2 hours. You get hangry pretty often. In the afternoon, you crash. You have that energy crash between about 1 and 4 p.m. And maybe you don't sleep that well, and maybe you have brain fog. So that's typically the things that I see that most people who follow a super high carb nutrition plan, that's usually what they're feeling. Okay. So if that's you, here's what is usually going to happen to you when you start controlling and regulating your blood sugar better by following metabolic efficiency. So remember, what you're going to be doing as a high carb person is you're actually going to be lowering your carbohydrates a little bit. Nothing crazy, nothing ketogenic, nothing great, right? But you're going to be lowering it while you increase protein and increase fat. When you do that, your body is going to start to shift into more fat burning. When that happens, you may be feeling like you don't have as much physical energy. So let me detail this. You're going to have a different physical and cognitive response to this. The physical response is because you will be eating less carbohydrates, you will be storing less carbohydrates in your muscle. So if you're exercising or if you're training, actually, if you are training, I would highly recommend that phase, that about 4 to 6 weeks is very low intensity, zone 1, zone 2, because you're just going to have less glycogen stores. Nothing is bad about that at all, but your body has to shift. Your body has to adapt to lower glycogen stores. So If you are an athlete training actively and you're going to try to drop your carbohydrate while increasing protein and fat, please allow 4 to 6 weeks of a training plan that reduces intensity significantly. Okay. There's nothing wrong with you. Now, when this happens, when muscle glycogen decreases, yes, you're going to feel more fatigued. But here's the thing that I get from a lot of athletes. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing a whatever zone 2 run or zone 2 bike ride or whatever, and I don't have power. I'm not feeling like my pace is there, my effort is there, or my heart rate is higher. That's also another response to that. Totally normal. Okay. If you notice your heart rate higher during easier runs or rides or whatever, totally normal when you start to shift from using more carbs to more fat. But I have a lot of athletes that are freaking out. They're like, oh my gosh, what's wrong? I'm not gaining fitness. Let me just pause that. You are still gaining fitness. Whenever you move your body and your heart is pumping more than at rest, you are gaining cardiovascular fitness. You're also gaining mitochondrial fitness. It doesn't matter what intensity, right? So you can be doing a zone 2 run and maybe previously on a high carb plan, you're feeling great. Wow, this is fantastic. Maybe you crash later, but okay. And then you adapt to more metabolic efficiency, which is better for long-term health, longevity, and athletic performance. But in that first 4 to 6 weeks, that little process, that kind of segue into teaching your body to burn more fat, you're not going to feel as great in that same zone 2 run. Maybe your heart rate is a little bit higher. Maybe your legs feel like lead. And all of a sudden, you're doubting yourself like, oh my gosh, this isn't working. I feel horrible physically. It does not mean you're not getting physiological adaptations. You are still getting physiological adaptations. You just have to separate your feeling, the subjective, from the objective, right? The objective is training stress. You're still stressing your body from a training perspective, so you're still gaining fitness, but you're not feeling good doing it, right? So this is one part where you can't trust your feelings with it. Yes, you're going to feel tired. Yes, your legs are going to be heavier. Yes, but that is going to be temporary. Okay. The other part of this is how you feel cognitively. So physically, yeah, you're going to be a little fatigued in the first month or so. Cognitively, almost immediately, within the first few days, all of the athletes I work with report that when they start making that switch from a higher carb to moderate carb, remember, we're not going fully low carb keto, right? When you start to make that shift and increase protein, increase fat, cognitively, your brain amazingly switches to less cloudiness, less fogginess, right? You can concentrate better. You just feel more on, if you will, right? And that is because your body is now, your brain needs carbohydrate to survive, right? But as you control your blood sugar better, you actually start producing more ketones in your body because your body is using more of its fat stores as energy, and the brain is actually getting used to that a little bit, right? And it's actually a much better source of energy for adult brains. So cognitively, you'll see an increase, a significant increase in improvement from a brain functioning perspective almost immediately. Physically, you'll actually see a decrease, or you'll feel a decrease in your physical performance. But remember, you're still having great physiological adaptation and great mitochondrial adaptation at the same time, but you need to disassociate your feelings from that because, again, legs will be heavy, you're going to feel slower, your heart rate's going to be higher. Totally normal. Okay. So that's the first thing. That's the person who's coming off of a higher carb, lower protein, lower fat. What about the person who maybe you're like, you know what? I don't do high carb. I don't do low carb. It's just, somewhere in the middle, right? This is what normally happens with the moderate carbohydrate person who is practicing more metabolic efficiency. Now, yes, you may end up dropping your carbohydrate a little bit, but in this case, this person typically just is imbalanced with their protein intake. So typically this person, this moderate carbohydrate person, may drop carbs a little bit, but what they're going to really do is usually drop fat a little bit while protein comes up. Right? Protein is the most important to nail first because that is going to help you control your blood sugar. Then you want to kind of focus on carbohydrate and fat. But anyway, back to the point. If you're a moderate carbohydrate person implementing metabolic efficiency training, you may not feel or see as robust of changes immediately, right? As the high carb person. The moderate carb person, there's more of a gradual, like if I was talking to someone in the moderate versus high carb ballpark, the moderate carb person would say, yeah, I'm feeling better. I think, I think I'm recovering better. I think I've got more brain energy. I've got, less afternoon fogginess, if you will, cognitively, right? But the high carb person will immediately say, oh my gosh, yes, I've got immediate focus. I'm not crashing anymore in the afternoon, right? So that's the difference, right? The moderate carb person will just feel a more moderate introduction to metabolic efficiency training, which is basically they come more from they're controlling their blood sugar, but they need to optimize it, right? The high carb is coming from they're not controlling their blood sugar to controlling their blood sugar and then to optimizing their blood sugar. So the high carb person actually has another step in the process, where the moderate carb person has one less step, right? Because they're already kind of controlling their blood sugar. They just need to optimize it. Okay. So normally it takes the moderate carb person a little bit longer to see the positive effects because they are already controlling their blood sugar a little bit better. So in that case, I give it more around 6 to 8 weeks for that moderate carb person to see really profound effects. Versus the high carb person, they'll usually see pretty profound effects within maybe 3, 4 to 6 weeks. Okay. So those are the main things that really happen when you switch to more of a metabolic efficiency lifestyle, if you will. Remember, this is not a diet. You're basically just periodizing, which means increasing or decreasing your carbohydrate, protein, and fat at certain times of the year based on your training and/or certain times of your life to promote more health and longevity. So that's the beauty about metabolic efficiency training, is because you don't have to go on it and go off it. You're just fluctuating your macronutrients based on your body's health, longevity, and fitness goals, right? And that's the beauty about that. So hopefully this makes sense. Back to the question at hand, what happens to my body when I implement metabolic efficiency training? Please do two things. Separate yourself into that. Well, am I eating a lot of carbs now or just moderate carbs? And then the second thing is, when you are looking at the subjective assessment of if this is working, it will work. You'll control and optimize your blood sugar much better with metabolic efficiency. But when you're trying to grade yourself without testing, because listen, let me go off on a tangent. The best way to know this is a pre and post metabolic efficiency test, right? Absolutely, hands down. That's how you can test it quantitatively to see how well it's working. But if you don't have that, I get it. Subjectively, you're going to ask yourself, physically, how do I feel? And then cognitively or mentally, how do I feel? Because you have to separate those. It's not just about the physical body, because when you optimize blood sugar, it has very different effects on the brain versus the body, right? Similar positive effects, but still different in nature. And that's why when you're thinking about, is this working? You have to separate, is this working physically? Like, how do I feel physically, muscular, right? Then how do I feel cognitively in terms of your brain functioning? Okay, back to the question at hand. I hope that answered the question. Again, keep the questions coming. I love answering these every week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.